में आजादी, देश में आजादी, घरों में आजादी, बाहर में आजादी, बाजार में आजादी, रास्तों में आजादी, हम क्या चाहते हैं 377 से आजादी। ये करिए। मेरा नाम आदित्य बंदोपाध्याय, मैं सुप्रीम कोर्ट में प्रैक्टिस करता हूँ, लॉयर हूँ। यहाँ पे आया हूँ प्राइड वीक के लिए। यहाँ ट्रांसजेंडर लोग अगर यहाँ पे एक नुक्कड़ नाटक कर रहे हैं तो उसमें क्या वो है, क्या हर्ज है?
I'm Aditya Bondyopadhyay. I'm a lawyer. I'm largely based out of Delhi, but because of the nature of the work I do, which is take on LGBT cases, and there are very few lawyers who do that, I do travel quite a bit across India. And I don't just do litigation. Of course, I do that as well when required, but a large part of my work is also about training people up about their rights and making them aware of violence and violations, because the sad fact is that for a lot of people within the community, they have internalized violence to such an extent and normalized violence in their lives and violations in their lives to such an extent that many times they do not even realize when a violation is taking place. And so I have always believed that having knowledge is the first step towards claiming your rights, first step towards also resisting violence and violations where you see them happen. So that's more or less the work that I do.
I just wanted you to touch a little bit on Section 377 and tell us a little bit about it and what it entails and what it means for the community right now in contemporary times as well.
Okay, it was a law that was enacted by the British and came into force in 1860. So it's already been like more than 150 years, 55, 57 years. It's a law that became the template for the entire British Empire and their legal system across the world for criminalizing sodomy and same-sex desires. So you have the same laws in countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, most of Anglophone Africa, and in large parts of the Caribbean. So that became sort of the template law. In a way, the British first exported homophobia through this law into India and then exported from India to the rest of the world. It spread from India to the rest of the world. That's the sad history behind the thing. What does the law actually say? It's a law that criminalizes carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Now, what is carnal intercourse against the order of nature is something which is not very clearly defined, but has been developed by jurists through their judgments, and this is common law, so precedents have a play, has been decided by jurists to mean sodomy or anal sex. However, in India specifically, it has been extended by legal precedents again to go beyond that to any kind of sexual expression that is possible between two men. So, mutual masturbation, for example, or oral sex, they are all covered within the larger ambit of 377. The problem with this law is that most criminal law has a perpetrator and most criminal law has a victim. So a perpetrator is the one who who performs the offense, the victim is the one who suffers it. And the law targets the perpetrator to provide some kind of recourse and justice to the victim. This is one law where there is no victim. Consent or the absence of it is of no consequence to the law. So even if two people are consensually agreeing to have sex with each other, they are guilty of the offense, even when there is no victim who is actually going ahead and filing a complaint or anything. And this question has come up, in our courts, etc., this question has come up. And what they've said is that it's against the order of nature. So nature itself is the victim. The very fact that you're doing it, you're committing a crime against nature. Now, whether committing a crime against nature is something that needs to be or can be criminalized in violation of the entire gamut of fundamental rights that has been guaranteed to individuals is something which is really the crux of the legal issue here. And our point of view is that it is not. That you cannot criminalize people for something as intangible and up in the air thing like order of nature and some violations against it, and then put a pale of criminality on their entire lives and target them with as severe a punishment as life imprisonment, which is the extent up to which 377 can be applied against individuals. So that is something like, where the entire problem with the law lies. We have argued that this law is violative of the right to life that is guaranteed in our constitution. It's violative of the right to equality that is guaranteed in our constitution. That is violative of all the freedoms that are guaranteed in our constitution. And the Delhi High Court had actually upheld those positions. The Supreme Court decided not to do that. So that's where the law lies at this point in time.
From your perspective, what do you think is the current state of LGBT rights in India, and not just in terms of the legal measures that are in place, but what's happening at the grassroots level?
And at the social level.
At the social level.
Okay. I'm an optimist, and I actually am pretty happy about the way things are at this point in time. I started working some 25 years back, and at that time there were very few people who were even out. I mean, there were 5K men you could identify in the whole country. From that to now, when there are like literally tons of people who have come out, especially after the Delhi High Court judgment, and we can talk about that later, lots of people have now come out. Not only have they come out, over all these years of activism, what has happened is that we have created all these institutions and events and things that have now become part of their LGBT existence and lives. So we have pride parades happening even in small towns. We have film festivals, theater festivals, picnics, kite flying parties, social spaces like pubs. We have saunas now. So a lot of water has flown under the bridge. And irrespective of the legal situation where we have had a setback, courtesy of a Supreme Court, which has pretty shamefully actually reversed the excellent judgment that was given by the Delhi High Court, saying that Section 377 of the IPC, which criminalizes sodomy but essentially criminalizes homosexual existence in this country, is actually a good law. Like the High Court had said that this is a bad law and that it needs to be reversed. It's against our constitution. The Supreme Court reversed it. The Supreme Court said that it is a good law. Now, in spite of that sort of setback that we've had, on the ground, so many people are out there now doing activities, claiming their rights to do those activities as citizens of this country. Like, these are civil rights that are guaranteed to everybody and cannot be denied to LGBT people. That the genie is kind of out of the bottle now and it cannot be put back in. I see an enormous amount of energy out there, enthusiasm out there, tons of young people who are claiming the right to live as they are instead of conforming to what society dictates for them as their existential reality. And that is where the optimism lies. That change is inevitable now. I mean, I was thinking about it. Like after the Supreme Court judgment, there has been a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court judgment across the board, but largely also from important jurists in India and abroad. And I think that is a barb that is kind of hit home. The Supreme Court must be feeling it at a certain level, and it would be, I think, eager to make amends to whatever bad decision that they came up with in the Kaushal judgment. They have now admitted a curative petition and a curative petition is basically a petition to cure its own mistakes. They have now admitted a curative petition which will eventually be heard whenever it comes up. And that curative petition will be heard by a constitutional bench of 5 judges. And I was thinking that if the Supreme Court is wise enough to read the pulse and the mood of the people about whose lives it will be sitting down in judgment and comes up with a decision that is just, justified and humane, then it will go down in history as an institution that stands up for rights and would actually be sort of re-establishing the esteem with which the Supreme Court has been held by most people in this country. But if it does not, then the consequences would be that the Supreme Court would essentially be forcing millions of people to commit contempt of itself, because all these people are not going to stop being gay. All these people are not going to go back into the closet. All these people are not going to change their lives and their lifestyles and who they are just because the Supreme Court has come up with a dictate, stemming largely possibly in case of a adverse judgment from prejudices that the Supreme Court or the people sitting in judgment harbor. And if that happens, it will be such a sad story for a great institution in this country. And I hope it does not happen. But then you never know. We hoped it would not happen even in the last instance, but we essentially found out that the judges were sitting and talking not about the law, but about their own animus, about what are the prejudices that they personally harbor. And it comes across in the language of that judgment. It's, well, for want of a better word, pretty pathetic. And there is room for optimism. Things on the ground are not going to change. What is going to change is that the pail of criminality that has been sort of dumped on millions of people in this country for no fault of their own, in violation of international human rights of inherent status, because you are born gay, you don't choose to become one. And all of those things are going to sort of impact the institution itself. The way people look at the Supreme Court. I hope it doesn't happen. I believe in the institutions of this country. And there is optimism there. The energy that has been unleashed is going to make that change happen. If not by the institutions of law, then by the footfalls of the people who are out there living that life. And that's good. Mm-hmm. We are largely a society where what is normal and visible and within the experience of people becomes acceptable. Anything that is not within the within the imagination, the visible imagination of people, is something that is either scary or not us or the other, or things that need to be feared or sort of opposed, discriminated against. Of course, we come up with not very tenable excuses of culture, excuses of religion, excuses of Indianness to justify some of that hatred and opposition. Not necessarily completely actually logically justifiable. So there have been opposition to homosexuality per se and LGBT existence. But what has happened is that over these last 25 years, and I was talking about all the events, etc., that has increased visibility. Now we have got celebrities who are coming out as queer people. With that increasing visibility, there is a normalization that is taking place, and with that normalization, the degree of opposition, the degree of that visceral gut feel opposition that has been there at certain points in time is dissipating, and that's a good thing. We also are a shame-based culture, and the more normalized things get, the less they remain a matter of shame, the less they are dishonoring of people or families or individuals, and etc. And with that, acceptability grows, and that is probably what is happening. We are seeing that. Punjab University, where we are having the Chandigarh Pride, would probably not have allowed this level of this level of support and activity within the campus, using the campus's facilities, maybe even 5 years back. But with visibility, it has become possible. It is now possible to actually do that, and we are seeing that in many spheres, from within families to institutions to other places. So that's where the whole social reaction lies. But also visibility has its flip side, which is that with visibility, there are political forces and other forces in this country whose entire self-validation is based on a narrative of how they are superior to the other. So othering is a very important thing for them. And one of the ways of othering is to find new others that they can target with their opprobrium and their hate. we have right-wing forces, we have religious people, etc., others who are there. And this is the hopeless end of our social spectrum. I call them the hopeless end because they are beyond the scope and ambit of logic. They are at a sphere where they need to hate because hatred is what they thrive on. I mean, that's how they, like, that not only justifies their existence to themselves, but it is also what is their political capital. That's where they sort of derive their political legitimacy from, and these people will continue to do so. We have the right-wing BJP government in power, whose members have spoken in many voices, but largely been opposed to any kind of changes. Of course, the BJP comes from the whole right-wing history of RSS, etc., Hindu nationalism. And one of the sad facts of this whole nationalistic discourse is that they are aping the West. They're taking things that have come into the West in violation of our own culture and then giving it a stamp of approval of our culture. I mean, it's completely brain-dead kind of a logic, but they're doing it. Not just the Hindu right, but also other religious, political and other figures from the Islamic, the Islamic conservatives, the Christian conservatives, the Sikh conservatives, the Buddhist conservatives, and the Jain conservatives have all come out. But this is the conservative fringe. They are not the mainstream. They are the fringe. They thrive on that kind of discourse of hate, and they will probably continue to do so. It's very difficult to engage with them. In fact, it's almost futile to engage with them because nobody has ever been able to win the God question, which is one of the pillars of their existence. And because nobody has ever been able to address the question of whether my morality is better than your morality, and it's on the basis of that morality that all their fights are anyways. So we as a community and as part of our activism try and keep and refocus it on the constitutional issue. That yes, we do not have an argument with religion. We do not have an argument with howsoever you understand culture, but our constitution gives us certain fundamental rights as citizens of this country. And those are the rights that we want reinforced. And a reinforcement of those rights entail that we are not forced to live as criminal beings within our own country. So that's where we are at. So that, this is the social spectrum. As far as the media is concerned, of course, the media is a multi-headed hydra. One of the things that we decided way back, many years back in our activism, is that we will engage the media. And we have largely been successful in that. For example, the national media, both the electronic media and the print media, have largely been very supportive of LGBT rights. They have most of the big news groups have taken editorial position saying that 377 is something that is completely antithetical to the way we look at our republic, and that it has got no space in a modern forward-looking republic, and that it needs to go. So that has happened. That has happened because we have actually cultivated individual journalists, and we have engaged with the media repeatedly, constantly over years and years and years. However, there is also the media that is associated with, linked with, or owned by some of these fringe political elements that were spoken of. And they have completely been obnoxious in dealing with that. For them, sensationalism is what sells. And they do not have that ethical backbone where they would say this is something which is ethically wrong and therefore we will not do it. If it means that they will sell a few more copies, they will actually go ahead and do it. And we've had that end of the media as well. And we have to some extent engaged with them, but beyond a point we've said it's actually a waste of time. Because just like that fringe, engaging with them is kind of a waste of time because they are coming from a position that is unwinnable anyways. No logic will work against it. For these media people also, no logic will really work against it. So, we will let it be at that. The good thing is that the media that is progressive and supportive has a much wider reach. I mean, that is essentially the mainstream media. And in that, we are seeing enormous number of supportive things that is happening. And finally, there is a queer media that has developed. So there is a queer press in India now. So there are largely online, but some offline as well, things that are now being published on a regular basis, journals, e-magazines, newsletters, etc., which are by queer people, for queer people, and essentially engaging queer people, highlighting queer issues. And these are also getting picked up by mainstream media for for content and stuff. And then there is a cross-fertilization there which is happening. So I think by and large, the media situation is actually not hopeless. It's quite hopeful. Okay. Chandigarh Pride is something that I have been associated with from the time Pride began. I mean, I remember the early days where Dhananjay and I would actually have discussions, and then Dhananjay went ahead and collected few people, and then we had the first Pride, and it was such a proud moment actually. And since then it has grown enormously, and it has grown in support enormously from so many quarters. And this year, for the first time, we're having not only the Pride but also the Pride Week, where there are events for 1 week prior to the Pride every day of the week. These are like movies, seminars, theatre performance. Ek Madhav Bagh was performed by Mona Ambegaonkar, cultural events, etc. And I think it's wonderful that it has reached this stage, that the level of acceptance has gone up so much. I'm expecting that way more people will actually now participate in Pride because they know about Pride. It's very, very heartening to see the kind of response that Punjab University has actually given to the whole Pride event here, and the enthusiasm with which students, I mean, they need not be queer people, but students who believe in human rights and has that has that element of standing up for humanity, are joining in droves in helping out with events, in coming and participating in all the events, enjoying with us. And I am hopeful that this year we will have way more people than we usually have we had in the past in Chandigarh Pride. I'm very proud of it. I mean, I've been coming every year, and every year it is incrementally grown. Many more people have joined in to support Pride, and the direction it's taking is awesome. I'm really moved.
Are you hopeful that in some ways, all of this activism and having Pride and having large droves of people essentially supporting Pride in this way is going to have some kind of sway? Yeah.
Because, I mean, not just the system. I mean, judges do see television. There is television coverage of Chandigarh Pride, but the important thing is there are now prides everywhere. There are 18 prides in India now, what used to be a largely metropolitan India, like the big city India phenomenon, is now become a mofussil urban phenomenon. So you have Pride in smaller cities, what are called scale B and scale C cities are having Pride now. There has been 18, this year there will be 18 prides, which is awesome. Judges do see television. They do see that there are people who are out there talking about their rights. These are people who have spent an entire lifetime trying to uphold justice and fundamental rights of citizens. And unless there is an overwhelming prejudice that completely swamps everything that is their technical legal knowledge and their ethical duty as judges, I mean, unless they let that prejudice overwhelm it, I don't see any reason why it is not going to have an impact on how they sit in judgment about this. But also, the media coverage is seen by other people. I mean, the masses, people who see news every day, they are also seeing it. And with normalization, it becomes more acceptable. What used to be like, oh my God, what is this? What are you talking about? Will be like, oh yes, of course, I've seen you on television, or I've seen people like you on television. Huge difference. In a shame-based society like ours, this visibility and normalization is what reduces the impact of violence. I'm not saying violence is going to go away, because violence is not only because of your sexuality. There are a lot of other factors. India is a very complex country. There are factors of caste that leads to violence. There are factors of gender that leads to violence. There are factors of masculinity, or I would say the toxic hypermasculinity that many people have sort of come about to believe and rely on and behave as, that leads to violence. Political equations lead to violence. The othering that many political parties do lead to violence. Corruption leads to violence, because a lot of the violence by the police is essentially for venal gains, like extortion and blackmail from people whom they think they can target with a bad law. All of these things are also responsible for violence. But I think addressing violence and violation becomes possible when the masses stand up, recognize that even this violence is something which is not normal but abnormal, that this violence is something against people who are part of us. When that starts happening, it has got a direct impact on the level and scale of violence that is out there. And I think that therefore a thing like Pride has got a huge significance in the way it's going to impact upon larger societies. North India specifically, because you see, compared to other parts of India, compared to the south and the east, etc., there is a greater degree of hypermasculinity here, and there is a greater degree of conservatism here. And therefore, this visibility in North India, in places like Delhi, Chandigarh and other places, is extremely important.
Having LGBT people know that they can reach out for legal help when these things do happen, when violations do happen.
See, the thing is, the advantage that I have vis-a-vis the LGBT community is that I'm identified as part of the community. And therefore, there is a degree of comfort and ease with which people can reach out to me. I also happen to be a legal professional who has in the past worked with many different human rights and legal aid support groups. Participated in their functions, programs, etc. and all of that. So I have those linkages as well. It's actually physically not possible for me to be present for addressing every violation that takes place anywhere. But what ends up happening is, because I know these people who are keen enough to support LGBT people, but the community probably do not know them or are sort of wary of reaching out to them, etc. A large part of the time I actually act as a conduit, connecting these two people and saying that please help out. And there is enough benevolent people, at least in the field of law, in most urban areas, who are more than willing to come out and help. And it's always happened. So that is largely something that I have done, even in this case. I'm in Chandigarh, this is something that is happening in Kolkata. There was a lot of panic back and forth in social media that was happening. What do we do in such a situation? There's this woman who's reaching out for help in a kind of a dire this thing. But they did not know who to actually approach in Calcutta for help. There are organizations like Human Rights Law Network in Calcutta who are willing to help. But again, I know the people from Human Rights Law Network in Bombay and in Calcutta, and I could connect them, and then that help became possible. It kind of smoothened the. So that is one of the things that I do at a lot of points in time. It's also that because I have focused largely on LGBT rights and issues, I probably have a greater understanding of how specific situations are and what can possibly be done. So many times when some of these legal aid and support and other human rights groups are trying to help out people, they also reach out to me for ideas about if this is the situation, then what can be done. So that is the other area where I can sometimes help out. So that's how it works out. And with social media, it's become so much easier. So many people can connect at so many different levels in so many different geographies, and still get together, get a lot of work done, and get some kind of tangible relief out to people. And that's quite good. My real issue is that we're not political enough as a community. We have been so mired in our own sort of pathos and victimhood and what's going wrong with our lives, that we really are probably not engaging at that serious thought level where we need to engage with national politics. And the direction that the national political scenario in India is taking is probably not really happy, because we have taken a turn towards conservatism. We've taken a turn towards almost medieval, parochial understanding of cultures and situations. We've taken a turn towards dogma that has been largely absent from Indian discourse. We've taken a turn towards rewriting history in a particular narrative that tries to other others, large sections of society. It tries to other them and then victimize them. But it comes also from a narrative of self-victimization. The majority has been given this false narrative of that you have been victimized by all these other people, and they are targeting either your culture or your existence or your financial security or your whatever, and therefore you need to target these people. And these people, these others, are almost everybody who can be called a minority in this country. So these are Dalits, these are LGBT people, these are Muslims and other religious minorities, these are tribals, these are people from certain specific economic backgrounds, these are people with certain specific political understanding of things. And this othering, and then targeting them with things like, the moment they are othered, then they are targeted with things like you are unpatriotic, you are anti-national, you are a terrorist, you are this, that and the other. And along with that, there is this almost fascist narrative that is also developing, where the distinction between the state and the government, or the distinction between the nation and the government, is being blurred. So the individuals at the helm of the government are taking on the mantle of being the face of the nation. And your political opposition to them immediately makes you an anti-national. It's almost like, if you said Hitler was a bad man, you were against Nazi Germany. We're seeing that happen. You cannot say Modi is a bad man I oppose Modi for these reasons. You immediately are labeled as somebody who's a commie, as somebody who's a anti-national, as somebody who's Pakistani. And that narrative is something that we cannot not address if we are to have our rights. Because this narrative is coming from a group of people who want to keep us others, who do not want to mainstream us, who do not want to give us our rights. Keeping us the other serves their political narrative. We can engage with that, but I don't know whether they are ever going to actually give it to us, give our rights to us. So therefore, I think we need to become more political. As a community, we need to become more political and join up in solidarity with all these other groups, be it women, be it Dalit, be it minorities, be it tribals, be it people who have been oppressed as anti-nationals. We need to join up with them in solidarity so that our voice is forced to be heard. That is certainly not happening from the end of the community. Individuals are doing it. There are enough individuals with enough political consciousness to do it at an individual level. I do not think as a community we have developed that maturity which instills in the movement that sense of solidarity with others, where you need to stand up for not only your rights but also the others' rights, and become political enough to oppose these forces that will otherwise try and trample you. We still haven't reached that point of no return in India where the whole democratic edifice has been fasciized enough, where people cannot claim their rights anymore, where oppression has reached a level where people can be targeted with the most obscene levels of violence by the state. We haven't reached there as yet. But it's a very small step. And probably we're headed in that direction. The parallels with Nazi Germany that I see and India that I see now are almost scary. And maybe one day that next step will also be taken. We don't know. We've seen it happen in places like Turkey and Russia and all of these places. These are all places where the ruling elite are completely adored by the ruling elites of India. They want to ape them. Because control and power is more important to them than coordination and cooperation. And the language of control and power is exercised by this brute level of violence that they think is justified because it's an exercise of power. And they would do it against our communities also. If if they become or if they acquire enough power. We need to be politically more active to resist that from happening. I don't think that's happening as yet. Well, let's see. There are people who are trying to politicize the movement as well. Probably we'll get there. At some point, probably we'll get there. Let's see.
This nationalism, this whole Hindu nationalist sentiment is going to grow. Is that where you see it going?
Well, see, the thing is, what is growing is the story of optimism, economic optimism, that has been given out by the people who are actually believers of Hindu nationalism. And a large number of the youth have come forward and supported them because they have believed that story. If it actually happens, I would be very happy. I mean, we do need that economic transformation to lift out of poverty and hopelessness our youth population. We need to do that. If it happens, I'll actually be very happy. But if it happens, it is by itself kind of a check and balance against the fundamentalist tendencies of the government. I mean, no person who's a BJP voter is a 25-year-old guy who gets a good job, has a girlfriend, and would not be allowed to go out on Valentine's Day with that girlfriend. Because this particular section is the largest vote block that the BJP has sort of banked upon for their political victories, I see a liberalizing trend within the, sort of included within the way things are working out, and I'd be very happy. However, the danger is that the narrative of development and progress and economic good news that has been doled out is probably not going to work. Because at the core of their ideology, there is a kernel of hatred that they have not been able to excise out of their psyche. And it comes through. I mean, it comes through in very insidious ways. It comes through in very benign ways also. They will be talking about something very simple, but you can actually sense it. You can actually see the vibe if you look keenly enough. So that is also there. And if they fall back on that, then the economic development that they have promised will probably not work out. We have seen this pattern in the last government as well, where the government came with a certain degree of promise. The government came overturning a BJP government that was in power. And for 5 years, people observed it. There was reasonable enough progress for people to actually continue to want to believe in that government and not take recourse to the more conservative end of our political spectrum. And they elected this government for the second time. But I would say the termites of corruption that was actually sort of making the system hollow, they felt that these have been given legitimacy. So by the next term, the degree of corruption that the government sort of perpetrated was mind-blowing. I mean, I don't think it has ever happened in any elected democratic setup where the government could perform those trillions of dollars worth of corruption and actually get away with it. That was that corruption was the rock bottom that people saw. And then came this other narrative of clean governance, anti-corruption, development, etc. with a saffron Hindu flavor. People believe that. Young people believe that. Of course, they have a core vote bank that is always going to believe that Muslims needs to be sent to Pakistan, LGBT people needs to be killed or whatever. So that core constituency is the hopeless end of the spectrum anyways. We should not be even talking about them. But that has not been enough to make them win elections so far. What has made them win elections is that they have earned the faith of the youth. There is a huge effort that the government is putting in to saffronize the youth, change their mindset from the development story to the whole Hindutva story of how we have been victimized by everybody from Muslims to Pakistanis to you name it, and we are constantly threatened by something or the other. But I think these masses, this youth population is also savvy enough to actually kind of make up their own mind. And if they actually find that the government is not delivering on that end, then it will be the rock bottom for this government. Probably by the end of its second term. The first term, though, like, there's a honeymoon period almost. Like, people believe that they need more time to do it. By the time 10 years is over and nothing has happened, people will get around to, like, sort of like not believing the bluff anymore. And that will be the rock bottom for this government. And then probably, like, in the election after this one, 24, we'll probably see change. Till that time, I think this government is there. I mean, as long as it is there, it is going to do its utmost to sort of reinforce and apply and make real the false story of victimhood of the majority that it always relies upon to, like, sort of scare the majority into supporting them. It will continue to do that. It will always tell us that Muslims have invaded us and done these atrocities. The fact that is like history and prehistory is something that doesn't matter to them. Like, what somebody did in the 13th century is very real to them now, and they want revenge on, like, some Muslim guy who was born 20 years back and has got no clue as to what happened like 400 years or 700 years back. But they want that revenge now. I mean, the redemption of some kind of stupid honor that they're talking of. That story they're going to try and sort of reinforce and instill into people's minds and make them believe that. Some will, most won't. Most youngsters have got these other concerns which are more real to them. They want growth, they want good jobs, they want money, they want to have fun. They want to go out on Valentine's Day with their girlfriend or boyfriend. And if the government doesn't allow that, then they're going to stand up and say, FO.
क्योंकि हम जो हैं आज सड़क में उतरे हैं, हमें उतारा गया है, समाज ने, कानून ने हम पे यातनाएं कर करके हमें बाध्य किया कि हम लोग आज सड़क पे उतरे। लेकिन अगर हम आज सड़क पे उतर गए हैं तो हम फिर वापस उस कमरे में, उस घर में और उस अलमारी के अंदर घुस के बैठने वाले नहीं है जहां हम लोग पहले छुपे रहते थे। आज हम आपके सामने, आप देख लो हम कैसे दिखते हैं, खड़े हैं आपके सामने। गोली मारनी हो मार दो, यहाँ पे खत्म करो बात यहीं पे, लेकिन हिंसा मत करो, घृणा मत करो, हम पे कोई बेकार का गुस्सा मत करो, उसका कोई मतलब नहीं है, वो बेकार चीज है। आप अगर किसी से प्यार करते हो तो दूसरे आदमी को भी करने दो, दूसरे औरत को भी करने दो। आप अगर कभी प्यार किए हो या आपसे किसी ने कभी प्यार किया है तो जो भी ये प्यार के दुश्मन है उनके सामने आप दीवार बन के खड़े हो जाओ। सत्ता का, धर्म का, हमारे संस्कृति का ये सब फालतू बातें करके प्यार करने से, लोगों को रोकने से आप उनको रोको। बस यही मेरी आप सबसे विनती है। धन्यवाद।